She stood barefoot in the mud, clutching a torn sack of corn, her breath trembling as the morning wind bit at her skin. The ranch hands laughed from the fence, loud, cruel, and careless. "They sent the fat widow to feed your pigs, Mr. Grayson," one of them jeered. Their laughter echoed across the empty fields like thunder. But the man they mocked, Elias Grayson, the rancher everyone in town called the Lonely One, didn't laugh. He stood there silently, his gray eyes locked on the woman trembling before him. The world seemed to still in that moment. No one knew that from this humiliation something unthinkable would begin, a love so raw, so healing it would change two broken lives forever. She was called Martha Hill, a widow not yet 40 but worn by years of ridicule and loneliness. Her husband had died 2 winters ago, leaving her with nothing but debt, shame, and a body people whispered about. Too soft, too round, too much. Her late husband's family had thrown her out, claiming she was too lazy to deserve a man's name. Now she worked where no one else would take her, feeding pigs for the lonely rancher on the outskirts of town. Elias Grayson had a reputation that kept most people away. He spoke little, smiled less, and carried sadness like a shadow that followed him everywhere. The town whispered that he'd lost his wife years ago, that his heart had died with her. His ranch, vast, quiet, surrounded by golden plains, was his only companion. Until Martha arrived that cold morning, clutching that sack of corn, eyes wet and empty. "Put it down by the trough," Elias said quietly, his deep voice calm but heavy. She nodded quickly, avoiding his gaze. But when she bent down, her shoe slipped in the mud, and she fell hard. The laughter from the fence grew louder. She tried to get up, but her hands shook too much. Something inside Elias snapped. "Get off my land," he barked at the men. They froze. "But sir," I said, "go." The laughter died. The men shuffled away, mumbling as Elias stepped forward and offered his hand. Martha hesitated, ashamed, but he didn't move until she took it. When she finally did, she felt something she hadn't in years, kindness without pity. He brushed the mud from her arm gently. "You don't have to do this," he said. "They said you needed help," she whispered, "and I need the work." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Then you'll help me," he said softly, "but not like this." That night, Martha sat in a small cabin on the ranch, the first roof over her head in months. Elias had given it to her, saying nothing about charity. She stared at the lamp on the table, wondering why a man like him would care. Yet outside, she could see him walking along the fence under the moonlight, alone, his head bowed as if weighed down by ghosts. She didn't know it yet, but the same loneliness that haunted her had lived in him for years. Days turned into weeks. Martha worked in the kitchen, cooked, mended, cleaned. Elias rarely spoke, but she could feel his silence changing. It became softer, like the quiet between two people who didn't need words to understand. One evening she found him sitting by the barn, watching the sunset. "Your pigs don't much like me," she said shyly. "They'll come around," he replied. "They just need time." "Like people?" she asked. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Yeah," he said after a long pause, "like people." For the first time she smiled. But peace never lasts long in small towns. Rumors spread fast, too fast. "The widow's trapping him," people whispered at the market. "She's after his land." One morning she came back from town with tears on her cheeks, her basket of flour trembling in her hands. Elias saw it all, and something cold flared in his chest. He rode into town that afternoon. By sundown, everyone knew Elias Grayson had stood in front of the general store and told the gossiping crowd that if they ever spoke Martha's name with disrespect again, they'd answer to him. "She works harder than any man I've ever hired," he'd said, "and she's worth more than every acre of dirt in this valley." That night, when he came back, Martha was waiting by the porch, eyes red. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "I did what was right," he answered simply. "People will talk more now. Let them," he said, his voice low. "I've been alone too long to care what they think." She stared at him, this man who had nothing to prove yet stood for her anyway. And in that silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not love yet, but something deeper. Respect, safety, and the first flicker of belonging. Winter came. The nights grew longer, the ranch quieter. Martha's laughter began to echo through the halls, a sound Elias hadn't heard in years. She cooked stew that warmed his heart, patched his coat, and one night, when he fell asleep by the fire, she draped a blanket over his shoulders. He opened his eyes just long enough to whisper, "Thank you, Martha." But one morning, she was gone. The cabin stood empty, the fire cold. On the table lay a folded note. "I can't bring you more shame, Elias. People won't stop talking. I'll find work elsewhere, thank you. For everything. He searched for her for days. Rain, mud, frost. It didn't matter. He rode into every town, every farm, asking for the widow who had once fed his pigs and healed his heart. Finally, he found her near the river, working at a laundry shack, her hands raw, her face pale. "Martha," he said softly, stepping down from his horse. She froze. "You shouldn't have come. You don't get to decide that," he said. "You don't walk away because of what they say. They'll never stop," she whispered. "Then let them talk while we live." She looked up at him, this man who had once been called lonely, now standing before her like a man who'd finally found home. Her eyes filled with tears. "Why me, Elias? There are so many better." "There's no one better," he cut in, his voice trembling. "You're strong. You're kind. You're real. That's what this ranch needs. That's what I need," she cried then, not out of shame, but out of the shock of being loved without condition. And when he held out his hand again, just like that first morning in the mud, she took it. They rode back together through the falling snow, the ranch lights glowing in the distance like a promise. Months later, people still whispered. But the lonely rancher no longer cared. The widow no longer bowed her head. They built a life out of quiet strength and simple kindness. Two souls once mocked by the world, now finding peace in each other's company. And on the nights when the wind howled across the plains, Elias would look at her by the fire and say softly, "They sent you here to feed my pigs, Martha. But truth is, you fed my soul." And she'd smile, her eyes glistening. "Then I'm never leaving again." Because sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in beauty or youth. It comes in the shape of two wounded hearts that finally decide they deserve warmth.